Okay, good evening, folks. It's 7 o'clock, so we will to order. Sego ani buju endio wachaya kwekwe. As the mayor of the city of Kingston, I offer these words in the spirit of this gathering. Let us bring our good minds and hearts together as one to honor and celebrate these traditional lands as a gathering place of the original peoples and their ancestors who were entrusted to care for Mother Earth since time immemorial. It is with deep humility that we and offer our gratitude for their contributions to this community, having respect for all as we share the space now and walk side by side into the future. Okay, with that as the official call to order, Madam Deputy Clerk, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Mayor Patterson, we have quorum. At this time, all members of council are present with the exception of Councillor Kiley and Councillor Stroud. Present from staff, we have Lanny Hurdle, Chief Administrative Officer, Paige Agnew, Commissioner Community Services, Craig Desjardins, Acting Commissioner Corporate Services, Peter Hugenboss, Commissioner Business, Environment and Projects, Brad Joyce, Commissioner Transportation and Public Works, Desiree Kennedy, CFO and City Treasurer, John Bolognone, City Clerk, Lisa Capener-Hunt, Director of Building and Enforcement, Luke Falwell, Director of Engineering, Spiros Canales, Director of Facilities Management and Construction, James Miller, Chief Operating Officer, Utilities Kingston, Jenna Morley, Director Legal Services and City Solicitor, Tim Park, Director Planning Services, Lucretia Turner, Director of Recreation and Leisure Services, Kyle Compo, Manager of Licensing and Enforcement, Janet James, Deputy City Clerk, Chris Pippin, Manager of Utilities Engineering, Jeffrey Walker, Manager of Taxation and Revenue. Our host tonight is Ian Sullivan, and providing technical support is Marcus Legacy. We also have delegations scheduled from Elizabeth Lopez and Shanice Scott, Ward Hunter and Dana Babcock, and Ashley Pernott, and potential delegations from Ben Rogers and Marianne Higgs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have nothing under committee of the whole closed meeting. So we will move to the addeds. We have two sets of addeds. The first added is the amendment to a delegation and plus the addition of two other delegations and an item of miscellaneous business and communications. And then our second added has two additional delegations, a new motion and communications. Okay, so we will call on them. So first I'll ask for, okay, so lots going on here. Okay, so first I'll ask for a mover and a seconder for the addeds. Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Bohm, and Councillor Hill. I saw a point of order. Yeah, and I just want I might not be. This might not be a point of order. It might be just a question on it. But the delegation by Ms. Higgs is related to a procurement issue, and I know it's more. I think the reason that folks want her to be able to speak tonight is because it's about election issues. But I'm suspecting that that'll come up again as a topic of debate or discussion at future meetings. So I'm wondering if it's in order for it to be part of this session, or should we delay that and have it be a part of the election discussions that we'll have later? Because this is a procurement, and we don't normally allow. My understanding, at least, is that we don't normally allow delegations at procurement. Not that I don't want to hear from her, because I think her points are important, but I just think it might be misplaced. Thank you. Okay. So, Councillor McLaren, you moved this motion. It does appear as though the member of the public is speaking to something that isn't actually on the agenda, or it's related to a procurement issue. Councillor McLaren, do you have any input on this one?
Yes, the issue is more than just procurement. It's here for several reasons, and we're talking something that's going to go at least 3 terms. We're talking about the 3 elections down the road. So it's a little bit more than just procurement. I don't disagree that it is procurement, but it's more than that. And I believe that she's going to be raising some points that should be considered.
Okay. So your motion. So I'm just looking at the motion. So the motion is to waive clauses of our procedural bylaw. So that includes waiving the clauses which we normally waive, which is to add more than 3 delegations. So this motion here, is it also then waiving that
procedural clause. Is that what I'm interpreting? Okay. So Councillor Hill, I think this is what I would say. Because it is a motion, it would be out of order, except that the motion is waiving the procedural bylaw clause that speaks to exactly the issue that you've raised. So it's not a point of order necessarily, but it is a reason to speak against it if you disagree with that. So I think that would be the way I would interpret it. Is there anybody that wishes? So maybe what we'll do is we can separate that one delegation in case there's any further discussion on that piece. So first of all, I'll ask for the approval of the addeds for everything other than delegation clause 5. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Okay, and that carries. So now on a delegation number 5. Is there any discussion? Councillor Hill.
Well, I just think that given the fact that we have these rules governing our debate, that we haven't really given folks suitable notice that they'll have an opportunity to discuss how elections are run, because this is different. This really is about procurement. If we're going to have a discussion about how elections are run, which I absolutely welcome, and I absolutely welcome this person to come and speak, I think we should make sure that that's included as part of the agenda and there's ample notice so that anyone who wants to speak around the issue of how elections are run will have the opportunity to do that. I just think this is a little bit unfair to sort of everyone else, I guess, is my point. So I'm happy to, I certainly don't object at all to her speaking to this tonight if that's the will of council, but I just think it's out of step with the process that we normally would keep.
Thank you. Councillor Neal.
Yes, I believe that Ms. Higgs sent to us an email, and in that email, she acknowledges the procurement is something that's off limits, and she acknowledges that that isn't what she's going to be speaking to. What she was proposing to speak to, the only impact that it has is that it helps define the breadth of the issues that will be discussed. And the procurement, in fact, we may find that there are aspects that are recommended that don't meet, that aren't going to be part of the procurement. So unfortunately, the procurement may drive how we acknowledge or how we handle aspects of the election. And I think it may be a case of putting the cart in front of the horse. If we allow her to speak, but she starts to speak to procurement, you as the chair would be within your right, I believe, just to say no to that. However, if 2/3, it's my understanding, vote for this, for the recommendation that comes out of this, it would in fact allow that gray area between election and procurement. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that that's the intent, as I understand it, of Ms. Higgs' delegation.
Okay, and that's fine, Councillor Neal. That's why I haven't ruled it out of order, because that's exactly what you're proposing is a motion to waive our procedural rules to allow it to go forward. So now it's up for debate as any other motion would be up for debate.
But I'm not accurate in that it would be 2/3. Is that accurate?
Yes. So because it's on the added, it requires, yes. And to be honest, it requires 2/3 vote to waive procedural rules. So yes, it does require.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Chappelle, would you take the chair, please?
I do recognize you. The elusive mute button got me again, Your Worship.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I have a quick question for the clerk staff. Will there be subsequent? The item that's on the agenda tonight is simply a procurement issue to award an RFP. Our procedural rules are clear that we do not allow delegations for that. So I guess my question is, so I'm hearing from Councillor McLaren and Councillor Neal that there are other issues related to how we're going to run the election that are of concern. So the question is, are there other reports from staff that are going to be coming to council in the subsequent months that will deal with some of those procedures where members of the public would be able to speak in delegation? You're on
mute. Sorry about that. Thank you for the question, Mr. Mayor. Yes, there will be adequate opportunities for the public as well as council to provide input with respect to the April municipal election. We'd be pleased to provide a comprehensive, thorough report with respect to what we propose to do in 2022. Thank you.
Okay, so I think I see the issue is we certainly want to hear from Ms. Higgs and other members of the public on the details and issues around how the election will be run. That's fair. The concern that I have is if we have never, in my recollection, waived this particular procedural rule before. And my concern is always, right, what are you doing when you open that up? So it would be hard for me if someone was to come to a future council meeting and wanted to speak to a procurement issue, and I could say to them, well, I'm sorry, our procedural bylaw doesn't allow for you to speak to the procurement issue. They would say, well, you've waived this rule before. That's why it's in place. So I think as chair, I think what my recommendation to council would be, yes, we would want to hear from Ms. Higgs, but not by waiving a procedural rule that we have rightly and purposely never waived before. And so I think my proposal, or what I would suggest to council, is if we voted against this delegation tonight, but then obviously once a report came that was not a procurement issue, and we've heard from the staff that will happen, then I'm happy, of course, to support anyone's right to be able to speak to that staff. So that's why I will not support this delegation. Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor.
I return the chair to you, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Next on my list is Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think most of what I had to say was covered by Councillor Neal. So really the question that I have, it's more of a question. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just struggling to find the report number. It's from, procedurally speaking, the delegation, if provided an opportunity to speak, as Councillor Neal suggested, there are aspects of discussion or presentation that would be not in order in this case, and certainly members of council who are asking questions of the delegation would have that to consider. So I just put that out there as reassurance that hearing from this delegation this evening does not mean that we are foregoing any future debate or potential public engagement on this matter, but and for that reason, this exception does not seem to really fit into what a normal procedural. I guess the question of debating or having a delegation on a procurement item does not seem as relevant, I think, in this particular case. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the problem here is that, other than what's already been brought up, but in that context, the issue is it's a bit like, where does the technology end and the software start? where the results and the outcomes are related to the mechanical equipment you use and the procedures you put in place. And so a number of the questions have to do with equipment and whether equipment can do what one would want to do based on the last election, when apparently a number of things did not go as well as we would expect. That's why I say we should probably raise these questions at the beginning in case it changes what the RFP might involve, right? Or rather what the contract might involve. So if you read the delegates' submission, numbers of questions fall into those categories. So I think that's why it's worth giving it a listen. This is not a procurement like any other. This is about democratic election. And what equipment you use does affect that, as I think we all know from multiple elections with different levels of government. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, we will call the vote. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor McLaren, go ahead.
Thank you. So some points were raised, and I'd like to challenge some of the points that were raised against the delegation speaking tonight. And one of them was that anyone can speak on this at a later date. Well, it's not necessarily so that we should limit only to later dates. It's okay to start a discussion earlier or sooner. And this has a certain serendipitous benefit for staff, because if issues that are going to be raised today that are not going to be raised until however many months down the road, it gives them less time to be able to deal with them effectively. So part of having a debate is that we allow people who've spent time to think about this and to come up with questions and possible solutions, as well as issues that have to be dealt with, to forewarn staff to start the debate. It's not a problem to start the debate early. In fact, it leads to better debate. And so we do know that this is procurement, but there's more to it than just procurement. So anybody can speak to this later, but if we start now, we hear more, and that is a benefit for the debate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So with that, then we'll call the vote on, I'm sorry, Councillor Stroud, go ahead.
I just wanted to say something before we vote that I think is quite relevant. I was wondering to myself about the bylaw and the reason why procurement items are not, why delegations cannot speak to them. And I think the most obvious reason that comes to mind, and that would come to mind to members of the public, would be because interested parties, if it's procurement, you're talking about a competition between various private interests, and those that speak might be in favor of one because of their own private interest and not the other, right? So that might be why they're speaking. So for example, if we were doing the big dig and there's two contractors, do you really, do you allow delegations from the interested parties on the procurement matter itself? And I think that, so maybe I should ask the clerks, is there any way we can tell from the bylaw the rationale for precluding this type of item from delegations?
Mr. Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a great question. The reality is that the clause is wide open to allow that these things don't become a competition, and that delegations are permitted to come to items that are relevant in this case. In the procurement area, I think, is one where you don't want to get into that competition between different companies or different people of different interests. So as I said, it's wide open.
Seems logical to me. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. That we'd be opening a we'd be opening a big can of worms if we waive the bylaw for this procurement item and allowed for that type of argument in favor of one and against another for when there was a clear, as members of council, we have to declare our pecuniary interest, right? So we can't speak to items where we have a clear pecuniary interest, but members of the public aren't bound by that, right? So that's, to me, that's how you connect the dots on this bylaw. So I would suggest to my colleagues on this vote, if you believe that the delegation is here to go to bat for one of the parties because of a pecuniary interest that they may hold, that'd be a great reason not to vote for waiving the bylaw. But if you think they're here just on behalf of democracy in general and have important information to give us before we make the choice between the two options, maybe we should vote in favor. That's what I would recommend. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we will call the vote then on adding delegation number 5. All those in favor? Opposed? Just hold on 1 second. Can we do that vote one more time? All those in favor? Seven. Opposed? Okay. There's somebody that isn't voting. Unless I'm missing something. Okay, one more time. Can we vote in favor? All in favor, please? Thank you. Okay, so 8 in favor, 4 opposed. So that's 2/3 and that carries. Okay, thank you very much. With that, then we will move on. We have our addeds carried. We have, are there any disclosures of potential pecuniary interest? Councilor Bowman.
Thank you, Your Worship. I recommend Council of the Corporation of City of Kingston declare pecuniary interest in the matter of Clause 2, Report Number 18 as employee of Utilities Kingston, and may be perceived that a conflict with Report 18, Clause 2, insofar as it relates to Utilities Kingston and associated by law number 6. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have seeing no other declarations of pecuniary interest, we have no presentations this evening, so we will move to delegations. Point of order, Councillor Neal.
Just a quick request. When we go to those votes, would it be possible to go to the full screen so that all of council can see how we're all voting? Nothing against looking at you, but it's problematic when all of council can't see how the vote goes.
So you can put it on gallery view, Councillor Neal. So if you go to Zoom, go to the top right corner, you go from speaker view to gallery view, and you can see all of us all at the same time. So that's
I'm still learning new things about Zoom. Thank you.
But I will say, because I do try to do this by convention now, that on that last vote, I do normally call it those opposed. So opposed was Patterson, Hill, Osterhoff, and Bill.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Okay, so with that, then we'll go to delegations. Our first delegation tonight, Elizabeth Lopez and Shanice Scott will appear before council to speak to Clause 5 of Report Number 19 from the CAO with respect to supporting social enterprises, building sustainability in the food ecosystem at Portsmouth Olympic Park. And just a reminder to all of our delegations that you have up to 5 minutes to speak, and then we will open it up to questions from council. Ms. Lopez, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for allowing us to be here tonight. My name is Elizabeth Lopez, and I'm the Women's Entrepreneurship Facilitator at Keys Job Center. Can you go please to the next slide? The Your Way program is part of the Weekend Project, a federally funded initiative led by Queen's University. Its main purpose is to support women entrepreneurs by giving them tools and resources. Your Way is an initiative of Keys and St. Lawrence College in partnership with the City of Kingston. Our focus was to reach women entrepreneurs who may not typically have access to entrepreneurship services, specifically newcomers, Indigenous women, women with disabilities, and racialized women. It included intensive training on entrepreneurship and culinary skills. We also offer roundtable sessions with networking opportunities. Finally, we offered an English for Entrepreneurs course and digital literacy support based on participants' needs. The program started with its first cohort in September of 2020, and our fourth and final cohort completed all training last December. During this time, we have met many women entrepreneurs, 39 of whom completed the program. The majority of our participants were newcomers, people from 13 countries. In total, we supported the growth and creation of 35 businesses. 19 of them were food-related. To date, 6 of the food-related businesses have had sales. This is because there are 3 main challenges for food businesses: access to a commercial kitchen, a safe food handling certificate, and the access to funding. The program supported the completion of the second one. Next slide, please. The access to a commercial kitchen is the biggest barrier for different reasons. Existing commercial kitchens are not always available, especially since COVID started. Rental prices vary from $15 to $50 an hour, and it is difficult to store materials and find kitchens with the right equipment. Therefore, the Portsmouth Olympic Harbor opportunity would have an amazing impact on the community because it would create collaboration among the businesses. Entrepreneurs could easily offer their products to be available at any time. And for the city, it will be a great opportunity to support the small businesses which struggle with costs and contribute to increasing the diversity of culinary options in Kingston for residents and tourists alike. We would be thrilled to have the opportunity to grow support and collaboration on this project in support of the vibrant food ecosystem in Kingston. Next slide, please. I am pleased to now introduce you to Shanice Scott, one of the forces behind Manchi Guru and a participant in the Your Way program, to share more about her journey and what the access to the POH kitchen would mean to her.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shanice Scott, and I'm here with my business partner, Lucy Asamoda. Together, we created Munchie Guru, a Caribbean catering company that produces a variety of traditional Jamaican foods. We cater small and medium-sized events. And we also do individual meal plans, and we sell Jamaican patties by the dozen. Munchie Guru started as a food blog on Instagram, and with the help of the Your Way program, we developed into an actualized business. Through the program, we were taught and given access to a variety of tools and resources to elevate our ideas and push our business further along towards success and sustainability. They helped me a lot with improving my knowledge of the back end of owning a food business and making a business plan and marketing tools. At the start of the program, Munchie Guru was just a catering company, but by the end, we developed plans and ideas to expand the brand and grow the company. Unfortunately, since the conclusion of the program, we haven't been able to continue with our business due to the lack of resources locally and the costs associated with starting a food business. There's extremely limited amounts of commercial kitchens in the Kingston area, and the ones that I've seen personally aren't equipped with the best appliances, and they don't offer any storage space. Each time I'd go to use a commercial kitchen that I was able to secure for a limited amount of time, I'd have to pack up and haul the majority of my personal kitchen equipment to that space, as well as food supplies. The time slots were limited, and you'd also have to allot time for cleanup, so it just wasn't very functional. And because of this, we've lost out on a lot of opportunities, especially to have our products being sold in locally owned shops. And we've recently learned that these shops that were requesting our products are actually now sourcing products from producers and from larger cities. It's very difficult to feel like we have all the pieces of a puzzle sorted out to discover we're missing one final piece. And in our case, that would just be the commercial kitchen space and the access to those types of things. So having a reliable commercial kitchen, and also being backed by an organization that's working so hard for our success, as hard as we are, would be really amazing. Everybody in our cohort greatly appreciated the program. And I know that if we had that continued support, that all of our businesses would have great amounts of success. And the key thing that we just need access to is a commercial kitchen.
Great. 3 seconds.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you both very much. Okay, with that, we will open up to questions from council. Are there any questions? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation. It sounds very exciting. I just wonder if you could just, I just wasn't sure. The people who will be using the commercial kitchen, are they specifically the ones who've already come through the program, or will there be more people coming through the program? And also, will there be some food fairs for people in Kingston to learn more about it and appreciate the great food that will be made in Portsmouth Harbor?
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, the participants who have already gone through the program would be the ones accessing the facilities. For sure, if we can have these access, like we will be giving the access to many other small entrepreneurs in the Kingston area. So in this case, maybe ours will be the first ones, but there will be for sure more people who may be involved. Our participants have already received all the culinary knowledge and also have the certificates that they need to be able to prepare their foods in these facilities. And it would be great if we can have the food fairs for sure. Like I mentioned, our participants have come from 13 different countries. So we have a very good variety of food that we can have. And I hope that you can try because they're the best. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Neal.
Thank you. Quick question for Ms. Lopez. I've had not-for-profit organizations in the past that have been unable to fulfill their not-for-profit efforts because there hasn't been a commercial kitchen available. And of course, that's a criteria from public health, that it has to be an inspected commercial kitchen. And occasionally, Martha's Table have made their kitchen available, but that's not always available. Is that a service that you foresee you being able to fulfill in the future with whatever training is required?
Thank you for the question. Our main objective is to be able to work at this facility specifically, which is the Portsmouth Olympic Harbor. Up to date, we haven't been able to give this kind of access to our participants because there were no facilities available. So what we are willing to do is to have this access through the city of Kingston to the Portsmouth Olympic Harbor. That would be the only option that we will be working with for now. I hope that answered your question.
Perhaps I didn't fully understand your response, but if I was a not-for-profit organization looking for a commercial kitchen in order to be able to fulfill that not-for-profit effort, and I was willing to take some whatever training you provide, would you allow that not-for-profit group to access your commercial kitchen?
Well, I think once we have this access to the Portsmouth Olympic Harbor, any organization could be able to approach. It will not be only KISS or the participants from these programs specifically. I think it will be open. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Hey, are there any other questions? Seeing none. Oh, sorry, Councillor Chappelle, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question's for Ms. Lopez. There are other service providers in the city of Kingston that work with helping people, especially marginalized groups, get into the workforce. Is this restricted to just KEYS, or could the other service providers also be able to utilize this facility? Because I'm just wondering how this whole structure came about, because reading it for the first time in council news, I'm not sure how other players within the job sector market would be able to participate, or is this just exclusive to KEYS?
thank you for the question. Yes, we are right now working together with St. Lawrence, and the idea is to have the space rented. We have talked as well with our partners at the Weekend Ecosystem, Queen's University, and all other partners, Kingston Economic Development Corporation, and they all are interested in this space. So I would say that only depends on how many people we can get together to be renting this space. I would not say that it would be only for Keys, but any organization that is willing to also put on their efforts into this great project.
And supplemental to that, it seems to be targeted to marginalized groups. So my question is, would the Scottish Society be able to utilize this to make haggis and other meat pies, or is this restricted just to marginalized groups?
Well, the groups that we serve are the ones that I mentioned, mainly women, Indigenous women, women with disabilities, and racialized women. But for the case of the use of the space, in the end, it will depend on all the organizations that are participating and their public, like the populations that they serve as well. So it will not be limited only to marginalized populations.
Councillor Shiplis, that's two questions.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. Are there any other questions from council? Ms. Lopez and Ms. Scott, thank you very much. With that, we'll move to our next delegation this evening. We will invite Gord Hunter and Dana Babcock, who will appear before council to speak to clause 3 of report number 19 from the CAO with respect to the low-cost spay-neuter clinic report. Mr. Hunter, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Worship. I'm going to speak, and both Dana and I, Dana is our vice president of the board, will be able to answer questions. So just briefly, I'm going to focus on cats as opposed to dogs tonight. And well, eventually we would expect any spay neuter clinic to offer the services to both cats and dogs. Dog overpopulation is not necessarily an issue in Kingston or really in most of Canada. Education on dog behavior is prevalent in our society. Most municipalities have bylaws that establish dog owner responsibilities. In short, dogs are highly valued by Canadians. The same cannot necessarily be said for cats. The example I often use to illustrate this is you would be unlikely to see the owner of, say, a golden retriever open the door of his or her Sydenham Ward house and let that dog out to freely wander the streets for hours at a time. But if that same person was to do this with a cat, hardly anyone would blink an eye. This difference in value is borne out by our stats as well. 65% of the dogs that are brought to us as strays within the city of Kingston were reclaimed by their owners. Only 7.1% of the stray cats were reclaimed by their owners. This difference in the value society places on dogs and cats results in cat overpopulation. When 478 Canadian animal welfare stakeholders, including humane societies, SPCAs, municipalities, rescues, spay-neuter groups, feline, trap, neuter, vaccinate, and return groups, and veterinarians from across the country were asked, in your opinion, what would be the best way to deal with cat overpopulation in Canada? 70% recommended affordable and accessible spay-neuter surgeries as the key to addressing the negative consequences of cat overpopulation. What are those negative consequences? Well, we see it every day, actually, and it takes a toll on not just our most experienced animal care staff, but on every person that witnesses the deprivation and desperate circumstances of these cats. And those are just the ones that happen to come into our care. For the luckiest ones, we find them a forever home and they live out their lives in comfort, receiving and providing unconditional love. For those that are not fortunate enough to be taken into care by the KHS or by other animal welfare organizations, they live a life rampant with starvation, injury, and often a premature death. How does this happen? Well, one unspayed female cat alone can give birth to 25 kittens in a year. Using our 2021 stats as an example, the Kingston Humane Society took in 417 female cats last year. 78 of those were spayed. That leaves 339 unspayed female cats that came into our care. If left on the streets of Kingston to reproduce, those 339 cats could give birth to as many as 8,475 kittens in a single year. Fortunately, we spay and neuter every animal before it leaves our care. However, The cats that come to us are a small percentage of cats in this community. While unsheltered community numbers are difficult to come by, the consensus method to determine the number of cats in the community is to take the human population and divide it by 15. That results in an estimated 8,253 community cats. If half of those are female, and let's generously say that 10% of them might be altered, that would leave a potential for 92,850 cats born in a single year. The potential for an exponential reproduction explosion is mind-boggling. Of course, those numbers are based on a healthy female cat having 4 litters a year. The fact is that the lifespan of an unsheltered community cat is 1 to 3 years, and much of that time is spent starving or battling injuries and illness. Clearly, the main benefit of an active spay-neuter clinic is a reduction in the overpopulation of cats. However, they're not the only benefits. In males, it can prevent testicular cancer and prostate disease. In females, it helps to prevent mammary cancer and uterine infections. It also has behavioral benefits. In males, it reduces roaming, aggression, urine spraying, and territorial marking. And in females, it reduces aggression, howling, and house soiling. There are cost savings expected by reducing animal control, spending related to complaints, picking up, impounding, and sheltering. And in terms of public health and safety benefits, it reduces the transfer of zoonotic diseases from animals at large. Example of those would be things like toxoplasmosis, ringworm, or parasites. Additional benefits to society. Obviously, it eliminates injury and death to wildlife. There's less anguish suffered by people in animal welfare or people working with feral cat populations, and of course, a decrease in the direct suffering and death of the animals themselves. So with all this information, the next logical question is, why don't more people spay or neuter their pets? The number one barrier to spay neuter is cost. For those pet owners with an annual income over $100,000 per year, 99% of pets are spayed or neutered. For those pet owners with an annual household income of $60,000, that number drops by 10%. A study from the Journal for American Veterinary Medicine indicates that when annual household income is less than $30,000, 81% of cats and 32% of dogs in those homes are not altered. Will a spay-neuter clinic in Kingston help? Ontario studies have shown that in areas where a spay-neuter clinic was introduced, cat intakes have been reduced anywhere from 12 to 24%. And provincially, the most recent study indicated a provincial drop in cat intakes of 18% after the introduction of 3 Ontario spay-neuter clinics.
30 seconds.
That's the why of our request. As to what we're requesting of City Council tonight, we need your help to get things rolling. Capital costs required to run this type of clinic are significant. We need 2 operating tables. We currently have 1. We need 2 anesthetic machines. We only have 1 of those. With these things in place, we can be preparing 1 patient while the other is undergoing a spay-neuter procedure. Initially, our goal is to open the spay-neuter clinic once a month and do 20 cats in that day. That number might seem low, but with high volume training, we could double that. That's why we're also asking for assistance in funding training in high volume spay-neuter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joe. I'm gonna pause you there, and I will open up the floor to questions from council. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Hunter, for your delegation. This is something that Kingston needs and has needed for a long time, and really excited that this will happen tonight with council support if we get the support. I believe, I just wanted to ask you about last year in 2021. I believe that was a record year for the number of cat intakes that we've seen at the Kingston Humane Society for stray cats. Is that right?
It was a high number, Councillor Stanek. I wouldn't say it was a record. We had 903 cats that were brought into the shelter last year. Only 10% of those cats, by the way, were altered.
Great, thanks. That was going to be my second question that you just asked. You know, that definitely from what I've seen by attending the annual general meetings of the Kingston Humane Society for so many years, that you know, like even less than 10% usually are spayed and neutered, and this is going to be a great start. So thanks for answering that second question I had too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Next is Councillor Holt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much, Mr. Hunter, for the presentation, and to you and all your staff for the incredible work you do. You referenced the impact on staff with the cat overpopulation in Kingston, and I think really, I mean, your overall operation, it's easy to imagine that this overpopulation, given that you're another part of the facility work, it deals with adoption of animals. So I was just wondering if you could speak to the current situation versus what you would foresee as the improved situation with this model implemented on your overall operation.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Holland. We are almost always at or over our capacity, and 70% of those animals are cats. And again, that goes back to the value that society places on cats. And I see society, it's society in general, I guess. So what we expect to see is a drop in numbers of animals being brought in and bringing us back to a level that would be a bit easier to control. At one point this fall, we had over 300 animals in care, and we have room for 140. So it would just reduce the capacity, reduce our need for caring for that many animals. So, you know, that would be the immediate effect I would expect.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Ostroff.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Patterson, and thank you, Mr. Hunter, for that presentation. Incredible numbers, and having been part of the review of the bylaw, I became aware of the situation as well, and I'm very hopeful for council's support tonight. I just wanted to clarify: is this will you have 2 theaters at your location then, or will this be a mobile? Did I miss that? Is it going to be a mobile surgical? Okay.
No, it would not be a. Thank you for the question, Councillor Osterhoff. It would not be a mobile clinic. It would work within our surgery suite. In fact, we would not. We would, with the extra table and the extra anesthetic machine, we could still operate within the space that we have for our surgical suite. So what that extra table and anesthetic machine and the other additional items would provide is the ability to prep animals while one animal is being neutered or spayed, the other animal is being prepared, and that's part of the high volume technique that would be used.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's very important that we understand how important this is, and the incredible positive impact on our community. There's so many reasons to consider this, and I really appreciate hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just rereading the report because a portion of your presentation, Mr. Hunter, and thank you for that, focused on the sort of the difference between society's value of cats and dogs. I don't see how that makes any difference to the outcome of the report. It's not mentioned in the report. So maybe you could elaborate on why you were making a point of there's clearly a cat overpopulation problem in Kingston, but is it that the spay and neuter program is for cats only, and you're explaining why it wouldn't be for dogs? Or I didn't quite understand what your point was about the dogs and cats.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Stroud. I know I'd like our Vice President, Dana Babcock, to speak to this too, but just very quickly, it was more or less to point out that at the very beginning and as we move along in the early stages, we would only be spaying and neutering cats because of the extreme overpopulation, and that is not an issue with dogs, but I think Dana can speak to that as well.
Hi, thanks for your question. I tried to turn my video on, but the administrator has turned it off, so you'll just have to listen to my voice.
Hi.
You're on mute.
Hi. Okay. Just to speak to the importance of the dogs and cats, I believe what Gord was trying to get at is that the importance of not what society puts the value of our pet animals, but the actual animals' value, because cats, the overpopulation in Kingston does affect, it affects all the things that Gord said, but it also affects the city's resources and the city's bylaw, how many calls they get, the complaints that they get from neighbors. So it does affect the bottom line. But what we're saying is that the value of cats and dogs should be equal, and how it goes to the spay neuter clinic is that the spay neuter clinic is going to concentrate on cats to begin with, because that is the problem that is currently facing our city. And if the problem changes and we have stray dogs and we have other dog issues, or if we get to the point in which our spay neuter clinic is so effective that there isn't such a demand for spaying and neutering our cats, we can also open up to having a dog program. But the need in the city right now is to address the cat population.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. So it's basically that the need is for there's such a bad overpopulation of cats that the need is for spaying cats. And if dog owners are coming to the spay and neuter clinic, if it is implemented, wondering why they can't get their dog spayed or neutered, that's the reason, is because the cat problem is much greater. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from council? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Hunter, Ms. Babcock, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move to our next delegation this evening. We'll invite Ashley Perna, who will appear before council to speak to clause 1 of report number 19 received from the CAO with respect to conversion therapy update on criminal code prohibitions. Perna, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to speak once again about this really important topic. I had forwarded you all an email yesterday, and I'm not going to waste any time just reading that out to you. Instead, what I'd like to do is elaborate slightly on 2 points that I made. First, I want to talk about funding for survivors. I'd like to encourage council to prioritize funding for survivor-led groups. Sadly, there are prejudicial attitudes about queer individuals throughout the publicly funded mental health care system, and this does impact the quality of care received. For example, a counselor at one local organization saw that I'd marked down queer on my intake form and proceeded to assume that I would just love to party. He spent all of my sessions talking about how I must be a partier. For clarity's sake, I was there to talk to him about my agoraphobia. His misconception did cloud the way that I was treated for a very real mental health issue. So there are prejudices and attitudes that are present that do negatively impact the quality of care that queer individuals do receive. To ensure that city funds support organizations that are capable of doing the most good, I just want to make sure that you are all, please prioritize survivor-led groups. These are groups that are run by individuals who understand what it's like not only to be queer in Kingston, but to be a queer person who has lived through the type of abuse that conversion therapy is. Along the same lines, I want to point out that there is an urgency to these funds. The city has been working on this matter for over a year, meaning that we've been saying we want to help survivors without actually putting any money where our mouths are. At a certain point, we have to actually do something, not just say how much we want to do something. You know, like, think about it this way. If your partner says, I'm gonna do the dishes, but it's been 12 months and no dishes are done, you're gonna start to wonder if they actually care about the dishes. At the same time, I am very aware that there is a lot of information council needs to consider about these bylaws, some of which might feel conflicting. There are proposed changes and there's been correspondence received from all parties that has to be carefully considered. But please don't let this hold up delivering much needed funding to survivors. I would urge council to think about these things as 2 separate issues, one being funding for survivors and the second being enforcement. If possible, sever these issues in your minds and vote on them independently. Let's not forget that conversion therapy is actual abuse. It is abuse that is intended to erase a person's sense of self. Please don't ask survivors to wait just a few more months for funding that could be doing real good right now. Second, it has been very accurately pointed out that law enforcement officers haven't historically or recently treated the queer community very well. I understand reluctance of some folks that they might have to report conversion therapy related offenses to the police. especially given the fact that with this history, mistrust is to be expected. It is so hard to report a crime, one in which you felt that your sense of self has been violated, only to have the officer involved express judgment or respond with doubt. One way to ensure that survivors feel supported and feel heard when they report these kinds of crimes is to mandate and require that police officers immediately offer information about resources and support services. By immediately offering access to help, officers can send a message of belief, which is crucial to establish the kind of mutual trust and respect that's needed for survivors to feel comfortable continuing to report these crimes. Again, I want to stress that these bylaws and enforcement and all of these topics require very careful consideration. However, if council decides to defer this issue once more, please don't let that deferment affect the funding that survivor groups need right now. We've already said that conversion therapy is bad. Let's actually do something about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? Councilor McClure.
Thank you. You mentioned that professional groups may not really understand what survivors are going through as one of the reasons why we should be funding survivor groups. Can you elaborate on that or give us some more reasons?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a ton of evidence that shows that survivor-led groups offer more benefits to survivors. Benefits like emotional support, a sense of belonging, improved coping skills, a more trusting group therapy atmosphere, feeling empowered, and reduced symptoms. And I would be happy to send these studies to anyone who wants them from me. Of course, there are benefits to professional organizations and professional-led therapy. However, these organizations are already in receipt of funding. And while they're a great complement to a survivor-led group, they just don't offer the same benefits. Survivor-led groups are relatively new, and they just don't have the same access to grants and funding as pre-existing professional resources. By prioritizing these kind of organizations, we give them an opportunity to reach out and do the most good. There are like several in Kingston that exist that do desperately need funding. I think I don't want to step on Ben's toes, but Ben Rogers runs an organization called CT Survivors Group, and it does amazing things. And I think with the right kind of funding, groups like that could do so much good in Kingston. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from council? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Burton, thank you very much. At this point, we'll move to our next delegation. So before we do that, we'll just do vote. So we've added delegation 4 and 5. So now we need motions to officially then waive those procedural rules. So first, moved by Councillor Doherty, seconded by Councillor McLaren, that clauses 12.9 and 12.11 of our procedural bylaw be waived to allow Ben Rogers to appear before council to speak to clause 1, report number 19, received from the CAO with respect to conversion therapy, update on criminal code prohibitions. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Number 5, moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Neal. The clauses 12.9, 12.10, and 12.11 of the City of Kingston procedural bylaw be waived to allow Marianne Higgs to appear before council to speak to issues about the next municipal election based on 2018 experiences. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, so with that, we will now move to delegation number 4. At this point, we will invite Ben Rogers to speak to council with respect to report number 19 received from the CAO with respect to conversion therapy, update on criminal code prohibitions. Mr. Rogers, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, and thank you, council, for having me tonight. So as you know, my name is Ben Rogers, and I am a survivor of conversion therapy practices. I am also now the founder of CT Survivors Connect, the first in Canada federally accredited non-for-profit organization by a survivor for survivors. I am here tonight to talk to you in particular with regards to the motion that was to create a bylaw and to help with funding and supports and services for survivors. As Ashley covered a lot of what I was going to say with regards to the separation and the need for that separation of those two activities, I want to put forward to you just how much I agree with her and how much the work that I've been doing has actually helped people and helped myself with finding healing and finding community. Over the past 7 months, I have been running a support group for survivors across this country. And I have seen a difference by people telling me that before this group that they were terrified of coming to a support group for survivors, that they were terrified of reaching out. And now they've found a sense of support and a sense of community. I did that on my own. I went and I applied for the Awesome Foundation's $1,000 grant so that I could get the computer equipment and stuff so that I could do that, because nobody was funding. Nobody was offering anything to assist. I did that. I live on disability. I can't afford my own home half the time. And I did that for the community because that is what's needed. That should be happening from you. That should be happening from the provincial government. That should be happening from the federal government. You are responsible for taking care of the community that you work for, that voted you in and put you in the positions that you're in. So the ask that I have tonight is that you really do consider putting a motion forward to separate the bylaw properties. Do not give up working on these bylaws because the municipality still has the capability of change. You just have to now figure out how it's going to work with the federal law. So don't give up on that, but keep working on it, but make that a separate motion. The other motion that I would like to hopefully have someone put forward is to create official funding and official supports that will start as of now to help survivors like myself and like many others across this country that are in such desperate need. Another comment that I want to make is I really truly hope that those that were directly involved or indirectly involved with conversion practices over the years, mine and other people's, would hopefully see the wrong that was done, hopefully admit the wrong that was done, and denounce these practices officially and truthfully. I hope that churches will come forward and ask to be educated. I've been asked by Queen's University Church to speak to their young adults program. That's the first church other than Seth Perry's Anglican Church in Kingston, or Lutheran Church, sorry. Got to make sure I get those right. I've been asked to speak in front of. That is an amazing step forward. Education needs to happen. Myself and a couple other groups, No Conversion Canada and CBRC, are working to create an educational platform, but that's going to need funding. And I'm going to need help. I am a Kingstonian. I was born in Kingston. I love my city. I will always revert back to there. But I need to know that I'm going to be supported. I need to know that I'm going to be supported by you, Mr. Mayor, who unfortunately were a part of my conversion therapy, whether directly or indirectly, you were. And it's been really hard for me to discuss this and put this forward, having to see your face. I'm not going to lie. And I want to see the change that you've said that you've made, Mr. Mayor. I want to see the change that all of you can make, Council. And I truly implore you, and I ask, absolutely, as a survivor, as a human being, that you will do the right thing. Put forward a motion that will separate, that you will keep your promise to work on a bylaw that will support survivors, but also make that promise that you will actually support us. That is what I'm asking for tonight. Thank you for hearing me. Thank you for having me.
Are there any questions from council? Councilor Stroud.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. So if you could just elaborate a little further. So the recommendation in front of us, you're saying there's something missing from the recommendation we're voting on tonight, and we need a new motion. Is that what you're suggesting? And I just need a little bit.
So
more.
I think potentially you are going to need to do a new motion, a motion that is going to make a separation between the law that you are working on, the bylaws, and those enforcements, and the actual work that you're going to do to directly support the services and supports that are needed for conversion survivors. So I truly do think that a new motion is going to need to be put forward to really make that work. Because otherwise it's just going to get passed off. It's going to be moved to the next month. It's going to be moved to the next month to do whatever's going to be done. And I don't think that's right. So I think the only true way to move forward is to really separate them. And in order to do that, I think you're going to need to do a new motion that's going to make those two things separate events that are going to be carried out by the council.
So, and I appreciate the point that you're making. You're saying that and after you're speaking to us and Ms. Perna, it is clear to me those two aspects are very different in many ways, and perhaps have different timelines, especially.
Yes.
But I'm wondering if could we not achieve that immediate end if the first clause of the recommendation was passed tonight, and that is the one to work with the health agencies and so on to and it has a time, it says June 30th, 2022, to develop a conversion therapy support system. So if something needs to be deferred, maybe it's only the second clause, which is the criminal code amendments. Is it possible that we separate it and pass one tonight and defer the other one, if that's what staff is saying?
I wouldn't disagree. I would say that maybe making an amendment to the first half, which, as Ashley mentioned, would be to definitely include survivor-led services and supports. I can offer up a brand new one if you guys need help with finding it. And I can guarantee that I can help out with finding a lot of the resources that you guys probably have no clue where they are. Because as a survivor, it's really hard to find some of us because we are so terrified of the world around us that we aren't willing to come out and we aren't willing to come forward. So really focusing a bit more of those abilities into survivors and what we can do is really going to help. So I think maybe adding or adjusting that first half a little bit to make sure that that is a good focus. I think that would be more acceptable. But as I see it right now, I think it needs to be a little tweaking on that first part.
Thank you for your commitment and for coming to us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Neal.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. I appreciate that there are a couple of churches that have engaged with your organization, particularly with youth groups. Have you reached out to the Kingston faith community to offer your services or offer a presentation to their youth groups?
At this point, I have not, and only for the reason that we are currently developing the first educational books on survivors and the conversion practices as is. So without having more of those educational tools, I don't feel it's appropriate yet for me to be seeking out to do education. But to do talks in front of youth and different things like that, it's a conversational bit, and I can do the bits of information that we have right now and forward them on to the other organizations that have. Whereas until we have a bit more funding to actually create that educational piece, I feel it's a lot harder to actually just go out into the community and be like, hey, do you want us to educate you? But we don't actually have education material for you yet. So that's why, I'm absolutely imploring that education be at the top, a high priority, and survivors be that priority, because that's what's going to get us there.
I appreciate that. If you can do something specific in a specific request to the city, I think it would be looked at favorably. So the other thing that actually, I think that I've just lost my last question. So thank you very much. It's been a long day.
Thank you, Councillor.
Shoveling my driveway. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from council? Okay, seeing no other questions, Mr. Rogers, thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that, we'll move to our fifth and final delegation. We will now invite Marianne Higgs to appear before council to speak to issues about the next municipal election based on 2018 experiences. Ms. Higgs, welcome, and you have the floor.
Hi. Thank you very much for making time in your schedule for me tonight, and I understand the seeming irregularity. Can I be heard okay? Yes, I have some background from political campaigns at various levels in this community over the years, and I have a lot of trust in the integrity of council and the mayor, and I know that you want, if anything, just to do better. And that's where I'm coming from tonight, not to interfere with your review of some of the particulars of, the RFP. That's not my focus. My focus is on how Kingston can conduct its elections in such an obviously good way that we engender even better community participation. I have my slides, and you can see the first slide, and I will ask that the second slide be, is that able to happen? Okay. So, the main thing is that we want to work with the contractor that's selected to maximize public participation. We want to instill confidence in the process. We want to make sure that there aren't barriers that get in the way of people being included. So the election guarantee to voters would be, that they're able to vote, that they have no access issues. And of course, we mean physical barriers, but we also mean the online systems. Have we maximized the prospect that if there are issues, if the glitches come up, that people have a helpline and so on that they might turn to. People want to guarantee that their vote is private. They may get a receipt if they do certain kinds of voting. Well, exactly what does that mean? Who shares it? Those are just concerns that people might find interesting to know more about. They want to know that their vote counted. Again, you get a receipt, you don't know what that really means or how it's independently verified. You want to make sure that all votes are counted and that no one voted more than once. Next slide, please. And so we know that one person votes, they have a paper ballot. That's obvious. When there's online voting or telephone voting, there's no paper ballot. So then the question is for voters, is there a post-election analysis done that verifies the accuracy, reliability, and security of the voting system? And I know, having gotten printouts from the staff at City Hall in 2018, it gives me a list of polls, but I don't know if there's a behind the scenes way of verifying with a spot audit or so on that those systems are foolproof. When we have other overlays like the electronic glitches last time, it brought up questions about the integrity of the system, and it would just be reassuring, I think, to the public to know more. So how will the city prepare to avoid some of the problems from the past? Next slide, please. So anecdotally, and actually, people have reported to me, because I did assist behind the scenes on several candidates' campaigns, that they weren't on the voters list. We know that's maybe MPAC's responsibility, but what could we do locally to maximize the prospect that people check the list, that they advise of issues, and so on? A few apartment buildings didn't get voter cards. That was reported. Were these cards used by others? Did they go astray? How would the system know? Anecdotally, people get voters cards for children who've moved away. What prevents them from using those cards and voting more than once? The internet system crashed before the polls closed. The extension of time was not well communicated, and that was something that I was involved in. And I didn't like the feeling of having to challenge what decision were being made on the fly, it seemed. Would the public have benefited from there being a helpline or a published a number or website or something where they could turn to independent of their own attempts to get online? So information. about who had already voted by internet or phone isn't available to candidates. And so there's no way that they could review what was going on, and scrutineers couldn't review the electronic voting results before they were declared official. Next slide, please. So what are the electronic security guarantees? How are cybersecurity attacks going to be avoided? That may sound over the top, but hackers don't have to have a specific political agenda. They could just want to interfere. How will the election results be verified? And is a recount of non-paper votes possible? Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Higgs. Yeah, I'm just going to interject there. So we're just over 5 minutes. So at this point, I'll open up the floor to questions from council.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Field.
Yes, I assume that staff will be able to share the slide deck from Ms. Higgs with the RFP respondents. And just a quick question for Ms. Higgs. Could you, were there any of those key points on that last slide, which I think was very important, that you'd like to reiterate?
Well, no, I think that you'll excuse me for, so the summary is we want it to be fair. We want everything to count. And most of all, we know that the public hadn't any way of knowing that there would be some other opportunity besides tonight to speak to these issues. So after the 2018 election, to my knowledge, this was not a community that called for a survey of satisfaction or asked for voter input on these matters. Some others did. I was able to go online and find those things. So my slide would have said fair, accessible, accurate, and not vulnerable to duplicate voting or hacking. But mostly the idea is, how do we maximize voter participation, confidence in the system? And I'd be happy to repeat these concerns and others helpfully with other community members as well, if that's appropriate. And I trust council to consider that, as well as the details of an RFP that I do not contest. And I don't contest the 2018 election results either. We just want better, and we want to instill confidence in democracy at the local level. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from council? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Higgs, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, so with that, we have no further delegations this evening. We have no briefings, petitions to present. Okay, seeing none, we have no motion. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Hutchison, did you have a petition? Okay, sorry, I thought I saw your hand there for a minute. We have no motions of congratulations, recognition, sympathy, condolences, and speedy recovery. So we will move to deferred motions. We do have one deferred motion moved by Councillor Doherty, seconded by Councillor Sproul. That was the conversion therapy information program and bylaw from our agenda in September 21st. And so now we have an updated recommendation from staff, which is clause 1 of report number 19. And so by convention, what we will do is we will put that staff recommendation on the floor for discussion, and then council can decide where to go from there. So with that, we will put clause 1, report number 19 on the floor. That is, find it, conversion therapy update on criminal code prohibitions. Is there any discussion? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I think I unmuted and muted again, but got it right. I wonder if we could actually separate the two clauses of the motion in front of us, the recommendation in front of us. And I would like to speak particularly to the first clause. I've prepared an amendment to that clause.
So we have an amendment from Councillor Doherty. Okay, so the motion to amend moved by Councillor Doherty, seconded by Councillor McLaren. That report number 19, clause 1, received from the CAO be amended by deleting the first paragraph in its entirety and inserting thereto. The council fund a support group that offers services from survivors to survivors for $20,000 per year for 3 years to be funded from the Working Fund Reserve, and direct staff to continue to work with identified local health agencies and faith-based organizations to create programming, including a public communications plan related to available local medical resources regarding sexual orientation, gender expression, and/or gender identity, in accordance with the guide attached as A to report number 21-236. Okay, Councillor Doherty, your motion to amend is now before council, and you have the floor.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So when I worked on the original motion last year over Christmas time, I researched the bylaws in other parts of the country. There were numerous bylaws in Alberta, and I looked at the Ontario law, the ban on conversion therapy. That is only for youth. It's not, that didn't include adults as well. But what was missing, and then I tried to find some court cases where some survivors actually went to the police and went through the courts, and I couldn't find any. And then I was thinking about if I was subjected to that kind of treatment, would I go to the police? And I probably wouldn't. And that's why the original motion included some support, a support clause as well. I felt like that was really important. And the way the support clause was written at the time is that we would go through agencies. But in the meantime, a lot has happened in the last year. And we heard today that Mr. Rogers has actually started as a survivors support group by survivors for survivors. And that's something that doesn't exist. And we have an opportunity here tonight to truly be, to help spearhead something that's needed across Canada. That's certainly was needed in Kingston when it happened in Kingston. And I know this is not usual that we fund things like support groups in general, but I think we've learned a lot in the last year. I know all of us on council, we're committed to create change, positive change in our opportunity, in our community, and to support survivors. So I hope you support this motion. I think it's the right thing to do, and I trust that you would support it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to the motion to amend only at this point? Councillor Stroud.
Mr. Clerk, can we have the motion to amend back up on the screen, please? So I agree with Councillor Doherty with everything that she said, and I agree with the intent of the motion. I'm wondering if a little bit more detail needs to be added to the motion, but maybe I can ask staff first to see if that's even required. So the original clause that was deleted had a timeline to come back to council no later than June 30th, 2022. There is no such timeline in this amendment. So when would we expect this funding to kick in, and would there be a report to council about such funding if this amendment passes?
We can have staff jump in on this, but I believe that it's an amendment, so it wouldn't change the date that is in the original recommendation. But I'll just defer to staff to answer that question. CEO Hurtle.
Thank you, and through Mr. Mayor. So, Councillor Strout, we would follow the same timeline that was originally identified in the report, the staff report, and the funding would start in 2022.
Okay. So perhaps an amendment to the amendment is not necessary. I just wanted to point out that the amendment does say to delete the first clause in its entirety, and that's where the wording June 30th, 2022 is in the first clause. So if we delete the whole thing, that date disappears as well. But the CAO has said that the funding would start this year and the timelines would be identical. So I guess it's not necessary, and I plan to support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to the amendment? So Hutchison.
I have a few concerns with this. We originally passed a motion that said we would go through health agencies. And I believe the reason for that is we could attest to their abilities and their capacity and capabilities. There's nothing in this amendment that suggests that we know where this money is going to end up or under what aegis or what principles or guiding standards. So it's sort of like, we'll throw that money out there and we're not sure where it's going to land. So it seems to me that this amendment should have some kind of report about who is likely or who is going to, or who responds to the RFP is going to deliver this service. If in fact we even agree that it should be a service we provide, since it's a health issue and we are not the provincial government. So these are my concerns. I'm not saying how I would look at it one way or the other, but it's a bit loosey-goosey at the moment.
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through Mr. Mayor. So Councillor Hutchison, maybe to try to address your concern, I think, the intent of staff reporting back would be to exactly be able to identify where the funding would be. And this is why, from a time frame perspective, we would be spending the next few months to work with the community to see where the funding should be or could be allocated in terms of best support groups that are available in the community and working with our partners.
Okay, so just as follow up, Mr. Mayor, this is directed to the CAO. What would happen is we would get a report on how such a program would work, what was involved, what the legal context would be, and so we would not be making a decision about any kind of expenditure. Correct? Tonight, in the June, yes.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So tonight, council would be making the decision to make the investment. And what would come back later from staff would be details around where the funding would be allocated. So even if you approve an amount of money tonight, you're correct, Councillor Hutchison, that doesn't tell us who gets the money and how it's possibly divided. But what we would bring back to you later in by June would be a plan that would show where the funding would be allocated, and council would then get to approve that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next is Councillor Neal.
Thank you. This is probably a question for Commission CAO Hurdle as well. I appreciate that you're coming back with the report. One of the great frustrations I've had is that it's often easy to pass bylaws. It's not always easy to enforce them. And most bylaws are complaint driven and have some kind of consequence with it. Can you
Councillor Neal.
suggest,
Councillor Neal, I'm just going to jump in. Is this to the amendment or is this to the main motion?
both, but I can wait till the main motion if you wish.
Okay, 'cause if the amendment
I
is,
do support the amendment.
yeah, the amendment is just speaking to the funding piece, just to be clear. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to the amendment? Councillor Chappelle.
Yes, Your Worship. I'd like to understand how we came to a number of $20,000 and why this would be something we'd be interested in doing, considering it's paid for by taxpayers. And there are services out there like EAP, Employment Assistance Program. There's other mental health services available that are funded to the province. I'm not sure why we are even getting into this business from a municipal perspective. So I'll put that to Councillor Doherty as to why we're looking at $20,000 and why she thought that number was appropriate.
Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. The 20,000 for 3 years would give, particularly, first of all, it's not just a health issue. It's a society issue, it's an education issue, and it was very much also a local issue. The funding for 20,000 over 3 years would give the opportunity to actually truly not just start a program, but to build a program up, because I'm sure it will grow. And I'm not talking about one particular. Obviously, staff are going to be looking at which organization we're going to fund, but the entire awareness that this has been an issue that we've never addressed as a society, it's just starting. This is so early days in something that such a support system by survivors, for survivors, doesn't even exist. We've discovered that this actually happened here in our community. And in a way, we're fortunate that we had a person who was a survivor of this horrible practice, had the courage to speak up. And we can have the courage to support that and show our commitment to help move our society away from a practice that was extremely harmful. It led to suicides from youth. And we've learned a lot over the last year. So the 20,000 is not a lot of money. The money is there in our working fund. It's over 3 years to make sure that there's enough funding, a long 3-year plan, so that it actually can grow, because won't be just in Kingston. It'll be in our local communities around Kingston as well.
So the funding you've indicated is not a lot of money. So why wouldn't you just go to the community and raise it from the public rather than asking the taxpayer to pay for it? That's my question.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a question that you can pose to Councillor Doherty. I think you've posed the question about with the funding, and she's given you that answer. But I mean, Councillor, you can make those arguments.
That's fine. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to the amendment? Councillor Holt.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. And through you, I think this is a question for CEO Hurdle. I apologize, I can't remember the fund, but I know we do have a fund available where various service providers apply on an ongoing basis and receive some funding from the city. And I was wondering if you foresaw this, an initiative like this being something that would get on, or not necessarily get ongoing funding, but that this particular amendment would provide the initial startup, and that in the future, an organization or a support group that came out of this could apply for ongoing funding from our own funds.
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So thank you, Councillor Holland. You're referring to the Community Investment Fund, which is provided to various community agencies, primarily in the social services sector. Definitely, they could apply for those funds. They typically are project-based funds, so they're not necessarily ongoing funding. But having said that, we work with different initiatives, and that's something that we could definitely look at funding as well through this other mechanism that the city has.
Thank you. So then, yeah, I'll just add, similar to Councillor Hutchison, I agree and acknowledge that there are many supports for mental health that are needed for many members of our community, and they're not currently available. And so, it's a terrible situation to be in, to be filling that void here as a municipality. I think based on what Councillor Doherty said, in this particular case, it makes sense to ensure that there is a program or some structure available so that individuals who are survivors of conversion therapy can find resources somehow. We know the ongoing operating funds aren't available for every organization that deals with individuals who are struggling, and that comes from the provincial level, but at least we can be assured that there would be an organization or support group or some entity that would be able to receive some ongoing funding for this very specific need in the future. So for that reason, I'll support the amendment.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to the amendment? Okay, Councillor Doherty, you have the last word if there's anything else that you wanted to add on your amendment.
I just want to add that and reiterate that this is not just a healthcare issue, but if we were to talk about healthcare, just around budget time, we spend millions of dollars on healthcare, and we were all frustrated that we shouldn't be doing it, but we did it because it was the right thing to do. And this is just thinking healthcare for a minute, we're in the same position now. But it is more than just healthcare. It really is about education. It is really about moving our society towards a more inclusive society. And I know we're all committed to that, so I hope you support that. Thanks.
Thank you. So we will call the vote then on the motion to amend. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried by a vote of 11-1. Councillor Chappelle opposed. Okay, so now we're back to the recommendation as amended. Councillor Doherty, you still have 4 minutes and 30 seconds on the clock to speak to the main motion.
Thank you. And I have a question for staff, and I just wonder, the report is very detailed, very legal language, and I just wonder if you could if staff, legal could just go over what changed since the motion was deferred, and the legislation, what changed in the federal legislation that we feel now that we don't need a bylaw. And if you could answer that. And the second question, well, I'll leave it at that. And I do have a follow-up question, please.
Ms. Morley.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. Since we last met on this topic, the federal government has exercised its authority to fully criminalize conversion practices in Canada. So the practice of conversion therapy, the advertising or promotion of conversion therapy, and profiting from conversion therapy are all now illegal in Canada. These offenses are punishable by up to 5 years in prison. There's no religious exemption for conversion therapy practices under the criminal code. There's no exemption for adults who voluntarily undergo conversion therapy, as we saw in the previous Bill C6. So these criminal code provisions, as we indicated in the report, are some of the most stringent conversion therapy laws in the world. And so what has changed is that there's no longer room for a municipal bylaw that bans these practices when they are now deemed to be illegal nationwide.
Thank you. In my follow-up question, I just wonder if you could also give some more examples of those changes, some more specifics, like what kind of jail time, for example, for some of the offenses, because I understand that it also includes advertisement as well now. And then also if you could speak to where the province is in this entire discussion, because they had a ban on conversion therapy as well.
You, your worship. Yes, I can speak to both of those questions. So under the criminal code provisions, advertising and promotion are now illegal as well. Those are punishable by up to 2 years in prison. The criminal code provisions indicate that the court can actually order seizure and destruction of any materials that advertise or promote conversion therapy. Causing another person to undergo conversion therapy is punishable by up to 5 years in prison. And of course, anyone convicted of these offenses would receive a permanent criminal record. In terms of the province, that legislation pertaining to youth is still in effect. It remains to be seen whether that would be repealed or modified in the wake of the criminal code provisions. These provisions only came into effect on January 7th. So we've yet to see what the province will do.
Okay, is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Councillor Strapp.
Thank you, Your Worship. I may have a question for Ms. Morley, but I'm going to start off by just framing where my thoughts are. Thinking about the second clause here. So the first clause is now, we've had an amendment, we've voted it in. That's pretty much how we've decided to deal with that aspect of what came from the staff recommendation. The second clause is very simple. We've just heard the solicitor's explanation. Basically, the criminal code changes have made our efforts to create a bylaw obsolete. However, it occurs to me that we're not fully addressing some of the concerns we've heard from the two delegations. So to remind council what we heard, the concept that that queer folk or those who have suffered abuse along these lines might be uncomfortable going to the police with that information. And I think that's a legitimate concern. So if the second clause means that we're not pursuing a municipal bylaw, what avenue would a victim have, other than obviously the supports that we're putting in place in the first clause, but to trigger the criminal code violation that they may have been victims of? How would they go about this, in knowing if we agree with the delegation's assertion that they do not feel comfortable reporting it to the police? So I guess that's a question to staff, either the solicitor or anybody else. What would a victim do to report a criminal code violation?
Ms. Morley.
Thank you, Your Worship. If the victim was interested in seeking criminal prosecution, there are ways of providing anonymous tips or working with law enforcement on an anonymous basis. Certainly, I would hope that one of the functions of the support systems would be to help victims to convey the necessary information to law enforcement in a safe and confidential way. But I can't in the moment think of any alternative way of triggering an investigation unless police independently became aware of these practices and chose to investigate them independently.
Right. So we still have a problem here. If we pass the second clause as is, we do not address the concern that both delegations raised about it's fine to admit that the federal government has made something criminal, but if the victims are feeling very traumatized by the abuse and not willing to possibly suffer further trauma by judgmental behavior by law enforcement, where are they to turn? They're probably going to be paralyzed by their trauma, and it could further the harm that they've suffered. So I really think we need to add something to the second clause that would put the onus on us as a city to perhaps receive that information on behalf of the victims. I haven't really.
I'm just gonna interject just there. Ms. Morley has her hand raised.
Sure.
Ms. Morley, go ahead.
Thank you, through your worship. I did want to clarify that even in the case of a municipal bylaw, offenses are investigated by law enforcement officers. So I certainly can't speak to the preference of the victims and whether they would prefer to deal with a bylaw officer as opposed to a police officer, but there would be some form of independent law officer involved in an investigation under a municipal bylaw as well.
Okay, now I'm confused because if we pass the second clause, we're not going to pursue a municipal bylaw. So then bylaw would not be involved. Are you saying that the victims could contact bylaw with a criminal code violation?
Ms. Morley?
Through your worship, no, I was simply clarifying that even if we elected to enact a municipal bylaw, I don't think that that would solve the issue of reluctance to approach law enforcement officials, because there's law enforcement officials involved in both the municipal bylaw and the criminal proceedings.
Okay, yes, I agree. So that's not an argument to vote against the second clause. It's we are still left with the concern from the delegations not being addressed about that reluctance to report. And so unless we come up with something tonight, we're probably looking at another motion in the future that would help victims in that way with a reporting system. Otherwise, all the onus lies with the victim and with their having the courage, as many of them may or may not, to report to the police. I'll leave it at that. I guess I will support the amended recommendation with that major point being raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Neal.
And thank you to Ms. Morley. She addressed some of my concerns. I guess one of my concerns remains, and that's the idea that someone who is a victim of conversion therapy, will they be able to approach a police force and be anonymous? Because often conversion therapy is forced upon people by parents or other people in authority. So perhaps Ms. Morley can address that. Will there be an opportunity for a victim to be anonymous, as there is, as I understand it, in a lot of sexual related crimes?
Ms. Morley.
It's difficult to answer that question with any certainty because it is very much fact specific in terms of the age of the individual and the specific circumstances and what the courts would allow. So unfortunately, I can't give you a definitive answer other than to say it depends on the situation.
Perhaps if you could look into that. I realize there isn't an instant answer today, but if we could look into that, that would be helpful.
Through your worship, I can certainly do that. Given that this is brand new offense, there won't be much to draw from, but I'm certainly happy to look into it for you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to clause 1 as amended? Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. So the message that I got from the delegations is that they do want criminal charges applied to perpetrators. The concern that they have is a fear of pushback, a fear of not being taken seriously, a fear of not being listened to. And so the sense that I'm getting is that what they would like from a city bylaw is to make it as easy as possible to get an investigation started, as opposed to coming forward necessarily themselves in a public way, in a way that is triggering or psychologically damaging for them. And so I suspect that there will be a motion coming up in the next few weeks on that particular part. But I think it's important that the motion today not be voted down, perhaps deferred, so that we can get the bylaw to be able to have a procedure or a process that allows victims to come forward, and as they're survivors, as they become survivors, they they don't feel re-marginalized or re-victimized as a result of coming forward. And that's probably what I think is the message that I got from the delegations. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Chappelle, Deputy Mayor Chappelle.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is for Ms. Morley. I thought in her presentation in the staff report, it was quite clearly outlined. And perhaps I could just have her reflect on the rationale for the higher statute of federal law and jurisdiction, and how that really rides on precedents, and how having a municipal bylaw is really mute, or the legal term functus, it's spent. It's the judicial precedence is no longer valid. I was just wondering if you could comment on that.
Morley.
Through you, Your Worship. Legal services staff did identify a number of procedural and legal concerns with having both a municipal bylaw and federal legislation governing the same topic. I believe what Councillor Chappelle is referring to is the concern that a municipal bylaw would be rendered unconstitutional in these circumstances because the federal government has now exercised its authority to criminalize conversion practices. And the courts have been very clear over time that municipal bylaws cannot invade federal authority in relation to the criminal law. So to provide an example, we saw the city of Calgary once sought to pass a bylaw that banned prostitution. And the Supreme Court of Canada held that the bylaw essentially attempted to usurp exclusive federal legislative power. And the court noted that while it might be desirable for a municipality to control or prohibit prostitution, this type of bylaw was deemed to be unconstitutional. So I certainly have similar concerns with regards to a municipal bylaw that bans conversion therapy when it is already illegal across Canada.
Thank you for your clarity.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Bull.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, this will be for Ms. Morley as well. I guess in a sense, from what I just heard, we're essentially bypassing any type of municipal bylaw. Simply, we don't have the jurisdiction anymore now that it's become federally ruled on, and we're just going to simply convolute the issue. So I believe the whole idea here is we're trying to say we support the banning of it, but in essence, we're also, we don't have the authority anymore to do so with the municipal bylaws. Is that factually accurate?
Through your worship, that's correct. From a strictly legal perspective, with the criminal code provisions in place, I don't see room for a municipal bylaw that is enforceable or constitutional. And if a bylaw is not enforceable, it simply doesn't serve its purpose, which is to help survivors. And I think that we're all on the same side of that fight. And I would be very reluctant to recommend a bylaw that may only convolute the process and make victims even more reluctant to speak out.
So would it be fair to say then that this essentially the bylaw would be redundant and our efforts should be focused in supporting them in other ways?
Through you, Your Worship, that's correct. Essentially what we've identified in the staff report, that this is an excellent opportunity to now shift our resources, both financial and staff, away from regulation and enforcement, which now lie with the police, and we can really focus our efforts on support and prevention.
Perfect. Thank you for that information.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I really agree with a lot of what Councillor Doherty has said about it not just being a health issue, but I also agree with what Councillor Chappelle said in that, we're kind of straying outside of our lanes a little bit here in terms of funding. So when we come across an initiative like this one that, needs to be assisted in terms of gathering momentum, I think it's completely appropriate for the city and for funding as seed funding, really, to generate the impetus, I guess, or the momentum to get the supports in place. And I think the supports would include, and certainly should include, assisting victims and survivors with accessing all of the resources, and that includes police resources. And we've seen that happen, in other areas where police were involved in it, maybe reluctantly in years gone by. everybody has to learn, and everybody's learning curve is a little bit different. And I have great faith in the police in terms of being able to provide the supports, but I think it's probably useful for them to get the education and support and training from these kinds of community groups that I think our funding is going to support. So in that regard, I do support this an initiative. I don't support us funding this in the long term, because as a municipality, we have responsibilities that we're obligated to undertake, and significant financial responsibilities that go with that. And we can't step in every time the federal government and the provincial government doesn't do what they're supposed to do. We can do it as a way of getting it started. And I think we've done some incredible work in that regard in a number of areas in Kingston. But at some point, we have to look at these different levels of government to say, okay, you got to step in and do your part. You got to support these community agencies. As Councillor Chappelle said, that there's community funding for that kind of thing, but also there should be federal and provincial funding as well. I think it's a good idea, though, for us to identify a need, to seed the resources to get that need addressed, and then to eventually turn it over to the community and other levels of government to make sure that it continues into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. So I think I might have a way to potentially address some of the concerns about the second clause. Given that there's obviously a jurisdictional issue, we understand all that. I think really the concerns are mostly coming because this is a very new piece of legislation. We don't know what the impacts will be. And I think based on what we've heard from the delegations, and not to suggest that having things go through the normal reporting channels is problematic, or that shouldn't happen, but just based on the need, the expressed need for more support in ensuring that individuals are protected from conversion therapy and its effects. I think we could do better with the second clause by adding, so I have an amendment, and it's a simple one. I have not sent it to the clerks. It's just a few words at the end. So I would suggest adding at this time, at the end of that second clause, to ensure that we had other recommendations to staff before that have similar wording, where we're directing staff not to take action at this time, but that's not to say that there couldn't be further consideration of this issue after we see what it looks like in practice when the legislation has been enforced in the community, and when we see what the results of the support are and how we might better improve on that. So that is the suggested amendment. I don't have a seconder. I'm sorry.
Okay, so of course, yeah, I do ask for amendments to be submitted in writing. In this particular case, Councillor Holland, it's a very simple, straightforward amendment that I believe everyone understands. So it's moved by Councillor Holland to add to the end of the second clause at this time. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Neal. Okay, is there any discussion on that amendment? Okay, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, thanks, Councillor Holland, for suggesting this amendment. I'm very supportive of it. I know legal worked with no conversion therapy over the last year on the old bylaw, or the bylaw draft that we discussed earlier and again now. So I think, I guess I have a question to staff is will you continue working with no conversion therapy? Because as Councillor Holland correctly, and you mentioned yourself that this is all a new realm and we're learning. So will you continue working with no conversion therapy and perhaps bring a bylaw to council for us to consider if you deem that it would be helpful in this situation?
Morley.
Worship, our conversations with No Conversion Canada have been very productive, and we've made it very clear to them that we would be pleased if they would be involved in any programming going forward. So we will absolutely be reaching out to them. In terms of the future, I think as staff, we always interpret these instructions as at this time for the most part. If anytime there are fundamental changes to the law that could affect council and the municipality, we would bring those to you. So if the law were to change or the federal government were to specifically authorize municipalities to implement these types of bylaws, we would certainly report back to you.
Great.
Deputy Mayor Chappelle.
My question's been answered, Your Worship. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion on the amendment? Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate what Councillor Holland is trying to do here, trying to smooth the way here. But what bothers me about this is that it's been made very clear to us what the legal status of any municipal bylaw will be. In fact, it could be detrimental in legal terms to the circumstances that survivors would face, or cases or suits that they wish to bring. So it seems to me we should just acknowledge that and vote for this clause which says we're going to not pursue a bylaw, because frankly, there's no good to come of it. And as far as I can see. So I'm all for the supports. I'm all for survivors being, being involved in survivors helping each other and that being facilitated by our funding that we've talked about and so on. But it depends on the structure of the program, of course. But I don't see there's any, by this amendment, I don't see that we're getting anywhere, actually. We're getting lost in the weeds here. It's being made very clear to us what this legal status is, and that it could be detrimental. I'm done.
Thank you. Next, Councillor McLaren.
So a question to staff about if we were to add at this time here, is that going to preclude from actually, say, trying to legislate that city staff members, when presented by a case of conversion therapy, must or should or shall, as opposed to may, give information or resources on what to do next?
Ms. Morley?
Through your worship, could you repeat the question? I'm not sure that I understand.
So as I understand this, what we're adding is here that as a result of the criminal code amendments, criminalize conversion therapy practices in Canada, council directs staff not to pursue a municipal bylaw prohibiting these practices. But we also heard from the delegations that one of the things they would like is to have, if a police officer is approached with a complaint like this, they present a believing attitude, one in which they provide access to the services that are required. So like the information, or I say a brochure or something like that, as opposed to, say, laughing it off. That's part of what I thought they were asking for. But if we're not going to pass any bylaw, nothing to do with the criminal aspect of it, right? But if we're going to pass a bylaw in Kingston saying this is how bylaw enforcement officers or police officers are supposed to behave in a particular situation. Is this amendment or this entire clause limiting that for our future? So for example, we can't discuss this for a year without calling a reconsideration. The message that I got from the delegations is that they want police to treat this differently than they have in the past. They want bylaw to treat it differently. And part of that is to give a more validating response and say, oh, are you sure? It's more like, okay, here are some resource materials that you can go out and find help with. Is that going to be infringed or prevented as a result of this amendment or this clause?
Thank you, and through your worship, the current clause is essentially not to pass a bylaw banning conversion therapy. If there were ancillary type bylaws that council wanted to enact, we could certainly do that. And I do not think that this clause prevents that. We'd certainly have to have a discussion about the municipality's ability to control what the police do on a day-to-day basis, but that's part of a different discussion for a different day.
Okay, thank you. Then I can support this.
Councillor Neal.
Yes, just very quickly regarding the amendment. I agree with Councillor McLaren, but I want to point out that we have two members of council that sit on the Police Services Board. That's Councillor McLaren and the mover of this motion. And if we heard a complaint about a lack of enforcement, we'd have that opportunity in front to bring it to the Police Services Board. I have confidence that most of our police officers would take this seriously. But, and I, again, will support this motion and the amendment.
Okay, is there anybody else that wishes to speak to the amendment? Okay, Councillor Holland, I'm sorry, I'll go to Councillor Stroud and then Councillor Holland, you have the last one. Councillor
Stroud. Starting to wonder if my shirt blends into my background. Before we vote, I never saw this up on the screen. So are we just adding 3 words to the second clause? Is that what the amendment is? At this time? Is that right?
So I've been a little bit lenient on some of the discussion, but I am going to ask us to focus at this point on the amendment itself, which is just adding those 3 words.
Okay, so here's the thing. The clause, as the solicitor just pointed out to a question from Councillor McLaren, the clause is actually quite narrow. It states not to pursue a municipal bylaw prohibiting these practices, meaning conversion therapy, right? So a bylaw prohibiting conversion therapy is what we're not pursuing at this time. It doesn't say anything about an ancillary bylaw, yes, yay or nay. And so when we've heard the solicitor say that that can be forthcoming, I don't see the purpose of the amendment if it's only talking to that narrow prohibition piece. So I guess it's moot. So if you support it or not, I guess I will, because it gives the impression that we're in favor. But what we need to do really is pass a motion about what we want a bylaw to say that will make it easier for victims to report criminal code violations in Kingston, because it's a problem in Kingston. So we're not any further ahead with this amendment, but I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holland, do you have the last word on the amendment?
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. So the first question then, I guess, in response to Councillor Stroud's questions or concerns, my understanding of the clause, or perhaps not the entire reason that the clause exists. I mean, there's lots of reasons why we don't want staff doing this work at this time. if I'm speaking to the amendment. But reading through the report, it suggests that the resources that if we're not directing staff to do this work, that the resources involved in having them do the work is something that's tied in with the first part of this. So if we're looking at an overall investment from the city on this initiative, then not having staff do the work of creating a bylaw, whether we agree that it's necessary or redundant or how it relates to the federal criminal code, is not really so much the issue as it is what our staff are doing. So we don't want our staff to work on a bylaw, but what we do want is we want to see resources directed in the other direction. So again, having read through that report, I interpreted that as that as a whole, this recommendation, sorry, I'm speaking just to the amendment, but the purpose for the amendment was that it is to ensure that we are not seeing that investment of our resources at this time, but we're not necessarily, and again, the rationale for adding those words is that we are not entirely clear at this moment what this new legislation will look like in practice, and whether there might in the future be some need for any future bylaws similar to what Councillor Stroud has referred to. So I hope that adds some clarity to the rationale for this. I do have one other quick question for staff, which is just, I think through you to Ms. Morley, I think you mentioned earlier that that adding these words would not make any difference, and that's how staff would interpret any recommendation. So I just want to clarify that to finish up the discussion.
My intent in saying that was that any time that there are significant changes to the law or the municipality is specifically authorized to do something new or different, we would always report back knowing that circumstances have changed and that it might warrant a change in council's decision. So I was simply implying that we always have an eye on what's happening and what the laws are. And when things change, we are obligated and compelled to notify you.
Well, in that case, really, the addition of these words is again to make a clear statement on the fact that we are not directing staff to do this work now, but that we would like to consider whatever our options might be in the future as a council, regardless of what staff might provide to us in the future on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we will call the vote on the amendment. Again, that is to add the words "at this time" to the end of the second clause. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries by a vote of 10-2. Deputy Mayor Chappelle and Councillor Hutchison opposed. Okay, so we are now back to the staff recommendation as amended twice. Is there any further discussion? Okay, so we will call the vote then on the, point of order, Deputy Mayor Chappelle.
Yes, Your Worship, I just want to see the whole, before we vote on it, I'd like to be able to read it all in its entirety.
So I've asked the clerks just to put that up on the screen.
Thank you.
Okay, if we can take that down just so I can see council. Okay, so we will call the vote on the recommendation as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried by a vote of 11-1. Deputy Mayor Chappelle opposed. Okay, folks, it is 9:13. So I will propose we take a 10-minute break and we will reconvene at 9:23. Okay, folks, it's 9:23, so we will reconvene. If I can just get council to just turn your cameras on so that I know that you're there. Make sure that we have a forum. Okay, so just to clarify, so the deferred motion is now moot because we passed clause 1, report number 19. So with that, we will move to reports. First up, we have report number 18 from the CAO.
Moved by Councillor Osterhoff, seconded by Councillor Osanek, that report number 18 from the Chief Administrative Officer, consent, be received and adopted.
Okay, so there are just the 2 clauses in the consent report. Would anyone like to deal with them separately? Oh, I'm sorry, yes, because of pecuniary interest, we will have to deal with them separately. So that takes care of that. So number 1 is award of contract equipment, support and services 2022 municipal election. Councillor Osanek.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do have some questions. I thought that the delegation by Ms. Higgs raised some very valid points related to what I would think would be the non-price criteria part of the RFP. So I just wanted to ask staff 2 points. Ms. Higgs raised cybersecurity threats, and I just wondered if cybersecurity was listed anywhere in the RFP under that non-price criteria. I do see in the report that both companies, both vendors scored equally in the non-price criteria. And I just wondered if cybersecurity was part of one of the aspects of the RFP.
Mr. Chair, yes, we will be engaging a third party to do penetration testing to ensure that it's not hackable. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, great. So that's not part of what the vendors, the selected vendor would do then. That's going to be like a third party. Is that what you just said?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And then the other point Ms. Higgs raised was how the voting system crashed that night. And it wasn't just for Kingston, it was, I think, for, if I remember correctly, all the municipalities that used the system back in 2018. So is that part of, like, is that really the responsibility of the company that we're picking tonight? And was that part of the non-price criteria?
Through Mr. Mayor, yes, you're correct. At the last election, the internet voting system, which was provided by Dominion, did become unavailable as a result of a load issue that was caused by a limit placed on the incoming traffic. And that was dealt with that evening there. So we don't expect that to become a problem at this election. It was identified last time. It's been identified this time with our vendor as well. And we don't anticipate that being a problem in this election.
Great. Thank you.
Chappelle.
Thank you, Your Worship. My questions are for our clerk. First and foremost, when there is a vote cast prior to election day, so basically in the electronic voting as well as the advanced polling, how is the candidate in the election to determine if a person is able to
I'm just going to interject. Is this a question about the scoring criteria, the RFP, or because it has to be with respect to the item that's in front of us?
So in the scoring criteria that was selected, one of the requirements would have been to allow candidates to know in near real time if someone has voted, so it supports them in the get out the vote process. So what system is in place for the selected vendor to allow the candidates running for office to know who's voted and who has not after the advanced polls are closed?
Mr. Mayor, I can answer that question. One thing we were investigating is the insertion of the candidate portal that will allow for that information to be available and released to the candidates to see who have voted already in the election.
So you're looking into it. So it will be part of the the product, or you're just investigating it at this time?
We're investigating that, but we anticipate that we'll be able to provide that service to the candidates for the upcoming election.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's all.
Okay. We will call the vote then on clause 1. I'm sorry, Councillor Stroud, are you voting or did you have something you wanted to say? Okay, Councillor
Stroud. Just want to draw council's attention to the scoring system in the RFP. My comment is really related to the scoring system that we use in general, because this is actually a really good example of the outcome that you get with the scoring system. So basically, they scored equally on the non-price criteria. So the cheaper option, it was preferred, which is perfectly logical. If everything else is equal, you go with the cheaper one. In this case, it's hard to prefer the more expensive option if the outcome is that you get an equivalent system. However, if the numbers were slightly different, it would still always go with the cheaper option. I would say that because if you see here the difference between the 35 points that you get for price, so the lowest option gets all the points, and the other options get a percentage of the points based on how much more expensive they are, right? So the votes was the cheapest option, so it got all 35 points, and Dominion was 77% of the points because votes was 77% of the price. It was 23% cheaper, right? So that 8-point differential there, if say Dominion was 4 points higher in the non-price criteria, votes would still outscore Dominion by 4 points because it's 8 points cheaper, right? So I'm just pointing out that we might end up on another RFP situation with just 2 bidders, where the cheaper option would be preferred because of this formula, even if it was substantially like 10 or 12% inferior on non-price criteria. And I just want to point that out to council, that that's the reality of using the system, that you always get the cheaper option, basically, unless the more expensive option is outrageously better. Just the way the formula works. Thank you.
Okay. If there's no one else who wishes to speak, we will call the vote on clause 1. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Clause 2, consolidated linear infrastructure permissions for low-risk projects related to sanitary collection and stormwater management. We will call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to report number 19 from the CAO.
Moved by Councillor Doherty, seconded by Councillor Stroud. Report number 19 from the Chief Administrative Officer recommend be received and adopted clause by clause.
Okay, so we've already dealt with clause 1. So we'll move to clause 2, public notice boards. Any discussion? Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to thank staff for this report, and we seem to have gone through this fairly closely. The one of the things here is it wasn't clear to me what happens when you look at the exhibits and who is willing to support the energy and management from community groups. I'm not sure. I think that will work really well in some cases because it's working now. In other cases, it may not. And I said that to staff. The the thing is, I think some councillors, given the wholesome support the council gave this, might look very carefully at whether they're going to have a notice board district or not. And it allows for councillors to access it, the process. So the one thing I had was, I was a bit surprised by one of the entries, and that is the Wellington and Princess Street location, question to staff, going to be maintained? It said something about 2023. I wasn't quite sure what the wording was imparting. So, Mr. Joyce is there.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. Yeah, so the intention is to keep that one at Princess and Wellington, but because the budget just replace it with the newer model that we would be standardizing on in 2023, but it would continue.
Okay, good. But in my view, that's good news. So when you're talking about the community groups that are interested, are we, I would have phoned you about this, but I didn't have access to the Microsoft Outlook for most of the day. So do they think that for instance, the Kingston Canadian Film Festival, they talked about one at the Daily Broom. Is that the only one they're doing, or is that somebody else responsible for Wellington Street?
So right now, they're willing to monitor one board, and we would look after the other one. Hopefully we can find someone to look after Princess and Wellington as well. I think that's the intention, as much as possible, to get the community to sort of adopt these to that extent, to be able to just manage the content on the boards.
Okay, so in the end, how many boards will we have as of, I don't know, the end of 2022, 20 or 23?
Yeah, so right now there's 4 that are existing, and we're looking at adding 5 more.
5 more, so 9 altogether. Okay,
yes.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for the work.
Okay, we have a number of speakers on this. Next is Deputy Mayor Chappelle.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is for Commissioner Joyce, and that is, I do know that we have a board being presented up in Westbrook in the district, District 2, but there has been some expressed interest in the Cataraqui Woods area towards Bert Meunier Park. So this report, as it's presented, has some new boards being put forward. Is there any opportunity to add future boards, or is this going to basically be the limit and we're going to stop here? So the reason I'm asking that is because I know I have some residents who've expressed interest at the Bert Meunier Park to have a notice board. And I just want to make sure that I'm not precluding that from being an opportunity in the future.
Thank you, and through you to Deputy Mayor Chappelle, I can tell you that the intention really is to try to provide these boards in communities where they're wanted. So I would say that in all cases, we would look at that opportunity to see if we can get a board out there. It may not be, from budget perspective, may not be possible this year, but we would try to get it the following year at the very least. So the answer is yes, we will continue to look at where these community boards can be placed.
Great, thank you.
Okay, next is Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, just want to check with staff, the list of community groups that are on the report. Did you connect with all of them and have an exchange, or I just wonder if you just tried to contact them, or if you actually did explain the whole process with them, if there was feedback, because I'm surprised that we don't have more of an uptake for boards, actually.
Yeah, I think Director Kenny can probably add a little bit. My understanding is we outreach to all of those that are on the list.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, I can say that we did, Councillor Doherty, we sent out initially to the list that you have in there, which is about 28 on that list. And then when we didn't hear back from everybody, the ones we heard back from, we started to compile a list of them. And then we went back out with an email to say, okay, are the remainder of the people on the list interested? So we did as much as we could to connect with people on the list, and when we just realized at a certain point we probably had to cut it off. But having said that, we're now in the process. I spoke with Councillor Hutchison about this. We're now in the process of trying to also just let other groups, maybe more underrepresented groups, know that we would like to hear from them as well over time.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Next is Councillor Osterhoff.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Patterson. And I do appreciate the work that's being done by Director Kennedy and everyone. I just don't see, maybe I missed it, and maybe I missed some communication. So I'm not perfect either, but I'd like to think there'd be a rural area I'd like to discuss with you as well that might accommodate a board. You know, we have a community hub up here in Glen Burnie, really, and that is a really, everybody loves to go there, even from the city. So I would think that would be a really as well. But I'd like to be able to talk to you about that, and I'm encouraged to know that it's something that will grow and that you're listening to that. But I don't see any in the rural area unless I missed it.
Commissioner Joyce.
Just thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor, very quickly, Councillor Osterhoff, that there was outreach to some organizations such as Edenwood Estates, Homeowners Association, and certainly we're open if there's community or a group or an individual that would be willing to look after it, and we can find a suitable place, then we're certainly open to that. So certainly feel free to reach out and have more discussions.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will do that.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, then we'll call the vote on clause 2. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to clause 3, low cost spay neuter clinic report. Discussion? Councillor Sarah.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I totally support this. Like how we heard Gord Hunter say, this is a start. It's really needed in Kingston. It's been needed for a long time. There's a lot of stray homeless cats out there, and we're never going to be able to address the population of pets without this spay neuter clinic. I know it's only 20 cats a month at the start. Some high volume, low cost spay neuter clinics, they can do 20 to 30 cats per day, but this is what we have. This is a start. We heard Gord Hunter say that with enough, training, hopefully the training down in North Carolina will become available again with COVID-19, and they can be staffed up and do the training and get to maybe 40 cats per month, which would then give us more than double what we can do right now with just the vouchers. So very much needed. It's a start, and I'm happy to support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Thanks to staff for this report, and thanks to Councillor Osanek, who's worked really hard on this initiative for a long time. And should also be recognized as someone who's been very supportive of the work of the cat rescue groups here in the city of Kingston, and an expert cat rescuer herself. So I wanted to acknowledge all of that work. It is important for all the reasons mentioned with the delegation and that Councillor Osanek just mentioned. One other thing I just wanted to highlight is that there's enormous pressure I've learned on our bylaw staff related to stray cats. So the community groups that do the work of rescuing these animals, for one, many of them don't have much funding and are doing it. Honestly, I don't know how they keep doing it, but they do rescue cats that are stray and feral and try to rehabilitate them and try to have them be available for adoption. But all of that, of course, is such a strain because of the fact that cat owners in the city of Kingston either can't afford to, or for whatever reason have not been providing that spay or neuter for the animals. So if we can make that more affordable, we will see a lot of really important impacts across the city and on the work of our staff as well.
Thank you. This is Councillor Osterhoff.
Yeah, just quickly, Mayor Patterson, thank you. Just want to echo the words that we just heard from Councillor Holland and Osanek, and I have appreciated working with Councillor Osanek as well, sitting on affordable housing. Really want to support this. I believe that it's going to gain steam. I believe it's going to be very successful. Many other communities have found a way to make this happen. And I learned that sitting on many different meetings, with the bylaw review, animal bylaw. So I'm really pleased that it's come up and that we can have best efforts to make this very successful with our support tonight. And I know that the benefits are going to far outweigh the costs. The benefits will be there for everyone, for the city, and for animal welfare as well. Thank you.
Okay, is there any other discussion? We will call the vote on clause 3. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Clause 4, Municipal Capital Facility Bylaw, 1300 Bath Road. We'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Clause 5, supporting social enterprises, building sustainability in the food ecosystem at Portsmouth Olympic Harbor. Deputy Mayor Chappelle.
Thank you, Your Worship. Compounding on the fact that with doctor recruitment, Keys was involved without a competitive process. I see Keys involved with this one as well. There are other service providers in the city that provide employment opportunities. I'm just wondering how Keys is involved with this process and how it wasn't set out as a RFP to other potential community partners if we were looking at doing a social enterprise of this nature.
Mr. Hugo Boss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Deputy Mayor Chappelle, for the question. So a couple things. One, this is the start of a 1-year pilot project, what staff is recommending to council. We thought it was important to get this started off on the right foot with an established program and operator. Keys has been delivering the Your Way program through the weekend funding for a bit of time now. So it'd be a good way to start with a program that already has funding available from upper levels of government, but it does not preclude the opportunities to bring in other partners and programs as soon as possible. Acting Commissioner Desjardins can touch on that a bit more, but there is funding available right now through the Your Way program that can support the use of the facility. That would be something that can start almost immediately to use the space, but does not preclude the opportunity to choose to join with other partners. I think I'll turn it over to Craig now.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, through you to the Deputy Mayor. It not only doesn't preclude, it actually, the goal is really to seek out additional partners. The project, in order to be successful, as we build out a business model, will require that we have other partners that deliver not just other employment services and skills development programs, but other services as well. So this will be an absolute collaborative model. We are working and will be working with a number of organizations to seek grant funding. And again, in the arena of grant funding these days, collaboration across the community is not just an ideal, it's actually a requirement in many cases. So rest assured that it will be a multi-partnered project.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is there any other discussion? Councilor Hutchison.
Okay, sorry, didn't look like it went through. Okay, I just want to say I fully support this and thanks for the work they've done and for the social groups and organizations that have supported it. It does, we had an element in our strategic priorities regarding social enterprises, and this by providing training and job opportunities or a chance for people to restart or start constructive life opportunities. I think this is exactly what sort of thing we should be doing, and it's good to see us doing it. Thank you.
Okay, we will call the vote on clause 5. Favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on, we have nothing from Committee of the Whole tonight. Information reports, if you have any questions, just raise your hand as I read through them. Number 1, tender and contract awards subject to the established criteria for delegation of authority for the month of November 2021. Deputy Mayor Chappelle.
Yes, in terms of, yes, Your Worship, in terms of delegated authority on a number of items, I'd like to understand if we could have some explanation as to the expenditure of professional services, request proposal number 4, just for some explanation as to the professional engineering services for the construction of the cycling facilities on Bay Ridge Drive from Henderson Boulevard to Cataraqui Woods Drive. I'm just wondering if we have the expertise in-house or why that cost is so significant of $500,000.
Mr. Joyce.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. So I don't think the title of this really conveys the scale and scope of the project. It's $7 million worth of work, 5 kilometers, multiple intersections. So it exceeds our capacity in-house at this time to be able to do this work. There's about 2,600 anticipated hours of design and technical support. And the 524 is less than 10%, I believe, of the total cost, so which is in line with projects of this scale. So there's a fair amount of work that's involved, everything from the intersection work that I mentioned, the stormwater, structural, traffic signals, street lights, over that 5 kilometers that's going to be worked on. And then, of course, our staff will be dealing with permits, approvals, reviewing, finalizing deliverables and all those kind of things, and testing soils.
Thank you, Commissioner Joyce. That gives me a little more assurance that it's value for money then, because I didn't realize the scope of the project. Thank you. And that's all I had.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, number 2, Mayor's Task Force on Housing 2021 update report. Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions. It says we're going to have a local housing forum in Q2 of 2022. What will be the focus of that? And I'm expecting something more than housing. what will be the elements involved in that forum?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Patterson. So staff are in the preparatory stages of that now. Councillor Hutchison, we are aiming for a date in May at this point. The primary purpose is to be able to get together different types of stakeholders from within the industry, whether it's the social services industry, the private sector, not-for-profit sector, so that we can be facilitating relationship building. And this was spoken to in the mayor's task force. In particular, we're building an agenda specifically around partnerships and innovation related to the creation of additional affordable housing. So we are still in the process, like I said, of finalizing the specific agenda, but it will likely include some guest speakers and opportunities for roundtable plenary discussion with local stakeholders to facilitate that event in satisfaction of that specific deliverable coming out of the mayor's task force.
And obviously that'll be available to the public, correct?
We are working on that right now in terms of what's going to be available. Because we're thinking it would be a virtual event, we're primarily focusing on looking at stakeholders, whether it will be open to the public or not. We haven't made a determination on that at this time. Like I said, we're still in the planning stages.
Oh, I'm a bit surprised by that. It would be a municipal meeting, so I would strongly encourage making available to the public, and especially since it's going to be virtual, it should be available. It'll be safe, is what I'm saying. Right? My other question has to do with the focus on coming out of the 10-year housing, or the new 10-year housing and homelessness plan, which indicates that we're looking at achievable affordable housing targets. Now, what do achievable targets entail? I mean, staff would have to have some kind of structure around that, what that word means in that context. It's not in the report. So I'm wondering what we're thinking about when we talk about achievable.
Ms. Portergraf.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Patterson. Thanks for that question, Councillor Hutchison. So first of all, we obviously will need to start preparing for the next 10-year housing and homelessness plan, which is in 2023, but with a lot of the information coming out in 2022 regarding census and other pieces, that's really what we want to turn our attention to in 2022. To your question on achievable, and what I will say is we have been doing some work, and this will come to the Housing and Homelessness Committee and then to Council as well, for information on a better understanding of kind of the supply needs across for various kind of areas of housing. Obviously, our attention through the 10-year housing and homelessness plan is on various elements such as transitional housing, various demographics, populations, social housing, and kind of the ongoing evolution of the social housing portfolio. So, what we're looking at for achievable target is, first of all, having a really good understanding of the needs, and then look at what we realistically can do and move forward on as through our municipal or service manager role. So that's what's implied with that comment.
Okay. I look forward to seeing what comes out of that. Thank you.
Okay. So moving on, we have no information reports from members of council. Miscellaneous business. We have several motions. First, number one, moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Councillor Doherty. That is requested by Tracy Colella, Canadian Women's Heart Health Alliance, University Health Network, Toronto Rehab. Council proclaimed February 13th, 2022 as Wear Red Canada for Women's Heart Health Day in Kingston. Number two, moved by Councillor Kiley, second, Councillor Kiley isn't here. So somebody else volunteer to move that. Moved by Councillor Neal, thank you. Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Bohm. that notwithstanding section 3.1.4 subsection 5 of the first capital place illumination policy, council approved the application submitted by Chairman Christian Swarney, India Canada Association of Kingston, for the illumination of City Hall and Springer Market Square on January 26, 2022 for the 73rd Republic Day of India. And then number 3, moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Councillor Bohm, that notwithstanding section 3.1.4 subsection 5 of the first capital place illumination policy, council approved the application submitted by Mona Rahman, Islamic Society of Kingston, for the illumination of City Hall and Springer Market Square on January 29th, 2022 for National Day of Remembrance of the Quebec City Mosque Attack and Action Against Islamophobia. Okay, so we will call the vote then on those miscellaneous motions. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to new motions. We have one new motion this evening, moved by Councillor Holland, seconded by Councillor Stroud. Whereas at the January 11th, 2022 council meeting, report 14 from the planning committee was not approved. And whereas report 14 was comprised of a bylaw to amend bylaw number 8499, restricted area zoning bylaw of the corporation of the city of Kingston, zone change from A5 zone to site-specific A5.617 zone, 596 Macdonnell Street. Whereas the failure of a planning committee recommendation to council requires a planning rationale. Therefore, it be resolved that council provide the following rationale for the decision not to approve report 14 from the planning committee. The proposed bylaw amendment is incompatible with section 2.7 of the official plan, as it violates land use compatibility principles such as increased shadowing, loss of privacy due to overlook, creation of a visual intrusion that distracts from the streetscape, and is architecturally incompatible with neighboring buildings. Councillor Holland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. So yes, at the last council meeting, we rejected this report from the planning committee. And the situation that we're in is a little bit unusual, which I think is what has led us to this point. And really, I would put the emphasis on the fact that it's unusual because the proposed development proceeded when it should not have, when the required approvals and building permit were not in place. And so now we are subject essentially to accepting, while the work has been stopped, there's less flexibility in terms of what could be asked for. And also given that the building at 596 Macdonnell, the proposal is for fewer than 4 multifamily dwellings as part of the zoning bylaw amendment. And in that case, there is no need for a site plan. So what was not addressed initially, because the development proceeded when it shouldn't have, there's no recourse to address it at this time, or without rejecting without continuing on with what we decided at the last meeting, which was to reject this recommendation. And so I would ask that council support this rationale as part of that decision from last council. And thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Hutchison.
Okay, yeah. I believe this was quite a close vote. So there are obviously arguments to be made on both sides. And I think Councillor Holland, gave a good rendering of one side of it. My concern is if you voted against this, what are you saying when legally if you vote for the rationale? Is there any fallout from that?
Ms. Moreland.
Thank you. And through your worship, Under the Planning Act, the tribunal is obligated to consider the decision that was made by council. So that's what they're looking at as part of their decision, but it would have no legal change to what the tribunal is looking at if there were some councillors that voted in favor of it and had reasons for doing that. They would look at the decision itself that was made by council.
And only the decision, not the split or anything like that.
Through you, your worship, they also consider information and material that you considered in making the decision, in informing that decision, but it's the decision itself that's relevant.
Okay. So I'm just, I'm not sure. I just think, okay, I have a question for staff, and that is, I recognize that the argument that part of Councillor Holland's argument, which is, it was all good, but particularly part of it was that this was illegally started and a lot of it built illegally. I think that's agreed upon. And I'm looking for staff to say, what can we do about that? And I think the answer is not much. Well, we were asked in the argument given by Councillor Holland, we were asked to take it into account. So
yes, that's true, Councillor Hutchison, but that's not what's on the table now. So we've made that decision as council. So now all that's before us is the planning rationale that we're going to attach to the decision we made. So that's not part of the motion.
It's part of the decision. Thank you.
Decision's already been made. We're not redebating.
Okay,
regardless
fair
of,
enough.
Fair enough. Regardless of how you felt about
From
whether or not you
narrow
disagreed
point of view, you're correct. The okay. Okay, I think I just wanted to get at that whole issue. I'm not saying it's wrong to be put off by that, but because I feel the same myself. But I do think that it comes into you know, my opinion is that while that might not have been right, we can't win this argument at the land tribunal. So so I'm a bit across purposes with the circumstances myself. That's what I wanted to bring up, because I'm sure I'm not alone.
Deputy Mayor Chappelle, will you take the chair?
I do recognize you.
Thank you. So I'm just going to make this comment. Half is the chair, and then half is a member of council. We debated this at our last meeting. I was in the minority. I agree with what Councillor Hutchison has said. This will be very difficult to defend at the Ontario Land Tribunal. But that being said, in my view, that question is now moot. I believe it's now important for us to support the decision that we made as council, regardless of whether we agreed with it or not. And so now what's before us is the planning rationale that's attached to it. Councillor Holland has provided that planning rationale. And so I think as council, we should now support that rationale that's been put forward. So I'm happy to support it, even though, and in spite of my earlier decision. Thank you.
I return the chair to you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Is there, I think I saw a couple other hands, but I missed. Next is Councillor Stroud.
I think what Your Worship just said is really the most compelling point. I've heard, we've all been in that position. We've all, you know, taken a position and lost a vote, and then a similar motion related to the same issue comes up. And if you think that every position you take binds you for eternity on one side of every issue, you don't understand your job, right? Your job is to vote on each issue separately. So on the case of this particular one, like the mayor just said, councillors decided I think we have to either give planning rationales, Councillor Holland has done, or the alternative is just let it go to the tribunal without that, which would would decrease our chances even further of upholding our decision. So it's fairly clear that what we have to do with this motion, to me, I think. And to the point of what are our chances at the land tribunal and whether that should be used as an argument at the planning committee, I really think that every time that anybody uses that argument, they're not doing justice to the planning process. The planning process is a bunch of us elected by our community to represent our community on land use decisions. That is the function of the planning committee, okay? The function of the planning committee is not to read a crystal ball of what's going to happen at the land use tribunal, right? That shouldn't be why you make your decision. You make your decision because you're representing the people that elected you. And if it is your reading.
Councillor Strata, I just want to make sure that you're speaking to the planning rationale and not to the previous decision that we.
I am speaking to all of those who use the chances of this at the land tribunal as possibly influencing this decision.
I understand that, but as chair, I'm going to have to be consistent because what I said to Councillor Hutchison, I'm going to have to say to you too that, we've made that decision. We need to now get the motion that's in front of us. That's all.
Okay, well, here, I'll hone it in on this motion directly. When you give a planning rationale, you are following the Planning Act, right? And that is our function as council in this instance. And again, I ask you to represent your constituents on this motion on whether they would want you to back up the decision of council with a planning rationale as stated in the Planning Act. In other words, do your job, or whether they would want you to play a guessing game about the future at the planning tribunal. What would your constituents want? That's the question. Thank you.
Anybody else that wishes to speak? Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Worship. And it's just a slight nuance to what Councillor Stroud said, because I was one of the people on planning who voted in favor of it because it came as a staff recommendation and the staff was following the rules. And I do believe that at the planning committee, that's one of the things you should be doing. However, I completely agree with Councillor Stroud in that now at council, I feel that I'm representing the interests of the community, and the community interest is not served by this project. So I will be supporting the motion tonight, or the rationale tonight, and I hope it sends a message not just to other developers or prospective developers in the community, but also to the tribunal at some point that says, you know what, part of this process has to involve what's good for the community and our ability to make some decisions in that regard, and not just follow those rules. So thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Councillor Holland, do you have the last word if there's anything you wanted to add?
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I probably, in bringing up what happened at the last meeting or the decision of the last council, in my remarks, I was mostly just trying to do a little summary, and I apologize if I've brought up parts of that discussion or debate that led us into not the areas where we shouldn't have been this evening. So thank you for indulging me and for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. No apology required. Sometimes context is required for motion. So, okay. So with that, we will call the vote on new motion number 1. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, we have no other new motions. Are there any notices of motion? Okay, Madam Deputy Clerk, I will ask for minutes, please.
Moved by Councillor Hill, seconded by Councillor Doherty, that the minutes of City Council meeting number 3-2022 held Tuesday, January 18th, 2022 be confirmed.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, we have some communications. Is there any other business? Madam Deputy Clerk, I will ask for bylaws, please.
Thank you. Councillor Bohm, you are excused for the first 3 bylaw votes. Before I start reading the votes, I will just point out that bylaws 1 through 5 were withdrawn as a result of the withdrawal of the deferred motion. So first bylaw vote moved by Councillor Holland, seconded by Councillor Hutchison, that bylaw 6 be given its first and second reading.
In favor? And that's great.
Moved by Councillor Holland, seconded by Councillor Hutchison, that clause 12.63 of bylaw number 2021-41 be suspended for the purpose of giving bylaw 6 3 readings.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried.
Apologies, I forgot to unmute myself. Moved by Councillor Holland, seconded by Councillor Hutchison, that bylaw 6 be given its third reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried.
Councillor Bohm, you can return. Okay, moved by Deputy Mayor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Bohm, that bylaws 7 through 9 and 11 be given their first and second reading. Moved by Deputy Mayor Chappelle, and seconded by Councillor Bohm, that clause 12.63 of bylaw number 2021-41 be suspended for the purpose of giving bylaws 8 and 9 3 readings.
That's carried.
And lastly, moved by Deputy Mayor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Bohm, that bylaws 8 through 11 be given their third reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, with that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Bohm, seconded by Councillor Hill. All those in favor? Opposed? And we're adjourned. Very much.